All right, today I'm here with Dan Brisebois, author of the brand new book, The Seed Farmer. You've been saving seed for over 20 years. And one of the little things I wanted to try and pull out of your knowledge base of what you've learned is how can new seed savers avoid getting overwhelmed when starting out? You're growing a bunch of stuff, you're tracking things are labeled, there's record keeping, when to harvest what. What advice would you have to simplify things so somebody can have a productive first season saving seed?
Well, my advice for jumping into seeds, and it's actually my advice for getting into market gardening also, is start small. Don't be too ambitious when you're starting. Often people jump into growing seeds because they want to save biodiversity. They want to reconnect with ancestral crops. There's all these reasons, or you want to rebuild the food system. Those are all really important things, but your first seed crop is not going to save any of those things. When you're starting to grow seed, your goal is to learn to grow seed and to get that experience. And if you get good seed, that's even better. But you start small, and the best way to do that is to start with less crops. Start with 1, 2, or 3 crops. And one variety of each. Don't go too big, and probably start with crops that, like tomatoes or peppers, are good to start with because they're already growing on your farm. If you're already growing them, and you just have to harvest the fruit from the plant and try it. Yeah, so start small. Start with stuff that is already growing on your farm or that you already love and that you use. And it's okay to have 1 or 2 tricky crops, but don't grow a lot of tricky crops right off the bat when you're trying to get into seed saving.
Yeah, my kids and I like to watch a lot of baking shows, competitive baking. A lot of that's 2 components. You have to bake something that tastes good, then you have to be able to decorate it well, pursuant to whatever competition you're in. Seed saving is really 2 chunks. You have to grow a crop successfully, and then you have to be able to perform the seed saving part of it. Is the growing part of it underrated, downplayed for maybe new seed savers, where they focus so much on the seed saving that you might not be able to grow the crop well in the first place? Thoughts on that?
I guess it depends how good you're a grower anyway, to start off with. So if you're a market grower or a home gardener who already has been growing vegetables for a long time and feel pretty confident with the growing, you probably have 70% or 80% of the growing down that you'll need to get for seeds. And so something like tomatoes, peppers, squash, any of the fruiting crops, you're pretty much there. But something like lettuce or carrots or a brassica green, there are more steps that you have to do because you got to get the nice vegetable, and then you have to get it to flower and then to go to seed. If you're growing something like lettuce or radishes or carrots or a brassica green, and you want to get the seed off of it, you have to first grow the vegetable, but then you have to get it to go to flower. And that's a little bit different because you have different challenges. One of the things especially is moisture. Like if you're growing lettuce heads, you can probably overhead water your lettuce heads without problem, as long as they're spaced enough so you don't get some like downy mildew or something. But once your plants start to flower, then there's more plant to get disease. But then also you don't want to get the flowers to get wet. And even once the seed starts to produce, adding water to those seeds is going to, possibly make it germinate, or just kind of get the flower to kind of get all rotten. And so those can be extra challenges. So I think that that's a part that is different than the growing of the vegetable, is for crops that are not fruiting crops. Just need that extra step. When somebody's a lettuce grower and lettuce goes to flower, they think to themselves, oh man, I should be a seed grower because I'd have so much money then. But once you become a seed grower, you'll notice first that the lettuce takes a lot longer to go to flower than you expected. And so you have to have planted at the right time for it to bolt at the right time. And you have to get it disease-free to that point, and you have to keep the seed protected up until the end. And so if you're in a dry climate, it's fairly easy if you're doing drip irrigation. But if you're a wet climate, you have other challenges that happen with it. So starting small lets you see all those things, lets you experience it. When you don't have a lot writing on it. Like I would never say go out and get a 5 pound lettuce seed contract before you've ever grown lettuce seed for the first time. It's learn it and do it.
That's an interesting thought. And I would have thought what you alluded to. Hey, I'm a market gardener. Let it go to seed. That's an easy thing, right? But now it's complex because it changes my watering and how I'm treating that crop. The other thing I'm thinking about is DTM, days to maturity. In regions that have shorter growing seasons, is this a potential problem? Let's throw out biennials. Let's throw out fruiting crops. So that would leave something like lettuce in there. If the DTM on lettuce is, I don't know, height of summer, 45 days or something like that, is it 90 days to pull the seed off of it? And then are you worrying about frost windows in northern latitudes where there's compressed growing seasons?
So that's a fantastic question, and that's kind of at the heart of what you have to learn because each crop's going to be a bit different. And so something like lettuce, um, so numbers aren't coming right to my head in terms of specific days, though it is in the book, I should say. But in our climate, and so we're outside of Montreal, we have we can get into the field around May 1st. If we want to get lettuce to seed, we're going to want to plant it early May to mid-May, or we'll plant it in a greenhouse and plant it even in early April. Because if we plant it too late, it'll go to flower too late. There's a couple problems. One of them is that for sure, we don't want it to get into the rainy season with the fall. We can have rainy summers, but the fall is very wet, so we don't want it to get to that point. Frost is not the biggest deal, except in the fall, but it's the moisture that's the problem. Things are just always wet, and that'll be a problem. And then something like I'm not actually sure it's as much true with lettuce, but like brassica greens, if we don't harvest them, if they don't get to mature seed pods by about mid-August or end of August, sometimes some brassicas kind of flip out of seed production mode and go back into vegetative mode. So you'll see that wherever the pods are at, they just stay at that point, and then the plant starts putting on more leaves. So this can happen with kale. This can happen with some of the brassica green, like the annual brassica greens. And so we need to get it in the ground early enough so it produces seed pods early enough so that it'll bolt, or so that they'll be not bolt, so that they'll be mature on time. And because if it's too late, they just won't keep maturing. And so, and each crop is a little bit different, which is why you need to learn the experience from each crop. But and so you've kind of narrowed the question to like DTMs in a short season, but there's also in places that have longer seasons, you might have really hot periods of the year where you have other problems. So if it gets too hot, sometimes like tomatoes or certain crops might not pollinate at that point, or the seed, there won't be any fertilization. So you don't wind up with getting fruit. Or with something like lettuce seed, and I don't know how, I think it's like 32 degrees Celsius, which is like, in the mid 90s Fahrenheit. There's a point around there, if it gets exposed to those temperatures, the seeds can go dormant for 6 to 9 months. And so that can be a challenge also. Not something that it can break the dormancy later, but still there's extra challenges if you're not in the right window. And if you're in a place that has a distinct dry season and a distinct wet season, you want to get your seed out before the wet season begins. Areas that have dry seasons, they can be wonderful for growing seed. But the moment it starts to get really wet, you might not have the opportunity again to harvest it. So DTM is important. And when you plant is also important related to that.
Is seed production also, I don't know the right botanical term here, photo period sensitive, like some cannabis type crops? Because I swear I've had a couple kale plants in my garden for over a year. We don't get insanely cold. It stays warm. It's like they just don't seem to want to go to flower and keep putting out greens. Do you need like that changing of season? Is it shortening of daylight that you might see that triggers this? Or is it more a hard wiring in for some of these crops at, making this up, 100 days, seed production kicks in and off we go?
Yeah, so there's two things that can be happening there. In the case, so Photo period is one of them, and that's probably not the problem with the kale. Photo period is more related to like stuff like spinach. Spinach, the days hit a certain length, and it's going to bolt. Whereas some other things, it's more related to how old the plant is or other stresses. In the case of kale, it's vernalization. You need a certain number of cold days and to get that. And so places where you don't have that cold, you often can't get biennials to go to flower. As a rough number, and I think this is a number that I learned from John Navazio, who was one of my seed mentors. I think it's about like 10 weeks at 50 Fahrenheit is like a guideline. For most biennials, they need that to be able to bolt. And so if you don't get that cold that long, some crops just won't go to flower. And that can be a challenge, especially in tropical climates, where you just don't have a clear winter period. And in that case, you really need to get the crop out of the ground and into a cold room for 2 or 3 months, for 10 weeks. And then if you get it out, it should bolt without a problem. And so that's true for something like carrots or beets, but then also something like kale or collards, that would be true also.
Yeah, little tips, tricks, interesting things to think about of you think you have it figured out. Well, I can grow kale. Yes, maybe for eating, but maybe not for seed in your particular bioregion, given these factors. So a lot of little details. And this is why your book, The Seed Farmer, can help cut the learning curve for a lot of beginners. So everyone should check that out if they're interested in doing this.
Definitely.